Susana, welcome to the Where the Climate Things Are podcast. Thank you for being here. I feel like I've known of your work for a very long time. And then we had a wonderful connection of ours. Anna put us in touch. And I'm really excited to chat. We all three of us went to the same high school and maybe middle school. I don't know. And yeah, I'm just so excited to be able to chat with you and learn more about your career and your interests and all that you bring together kind of in this awesome nexus. So without further ado, I think I'll just have you introduce yourself in whatever way you want to take that today.
Yeah, excellent. No, thank you so much for having me. It's fun when high school connections come alive.
I love it.
So I'm a multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary climate scientist. And largely my focus right now is working at the nexus of science and policy in really whatever that entails. A lot of that is working with governments on climate negotiations, but it's pretty broad. My focus is on the cryosphere. So that's the frozen regions of the world. So we've got the polar ice sheets, we've got the Arctic, Antarctica, but we've also got high mountain glaciated regions of the world, and also watersheds that are reliant on these. So glaciers, which is my area of specialty at the moment, actually impact 85% of countries of the world. And so that's my area. I also ski across polar ice sheets and do some expeditions in the glaciers, and also have a background in professional sport as an international elite rower. And I ski raced throughout my undergraduate career.
Amazing. And we'll get into all of that, but we'll leave it there for now. A question that I ask everybody at the beginning of this that comes on the podcast is one that I have a little bit more insight into you because I watched your TED Talk, so this will be fun. But what was your aha moment on climate, would you say?
Okay. Well, I just thought of that one now. That one that I mentioned in my TED Talk. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Good one. But
it doesn't have to be that one. It can be a different one.
No, I think just, being a little bit removed from that, that was something that happened to me actually at high school. So at our shared school. But I was also thinking of just looking at the climate scene very internationally, very locally right now, that it really is something that includes everybody. And when you're talking about how some people feel that they're excluded because they don't have a degree, they don't have certain type of expertise, and that I think we've really moved into a sphere where, at least coming from a position where, I do have a PhD, I do have 3 graduate degrees, I am in a lot of these sort of places where other people are trying to be, so to speak. It's like, we actually want that to be inclusive. We want everybody. And I work with people who have no degrees just as often as I work with people who have really advanced degrees. And for me, it's just a space where everybody has something to contribute. And I love that. I think another aha moment for me is that I used to think when I was quite little that science is something that's non-political. And I know now that's absolutely not the case. But with that, the idea that there would be people who are adamantly advocating for a future that's not survivable for many people. And knowing that actually, if we go back to the development of, before the Paris Agreement, before the Kyoto Protocol, the development of the whole UN Framework Convention on Climate Change is actually, it's worked into that system that petrostates really have a lot of control. And understanding that, for me, I think has really helped shape my perspective as well. And that we can't necessarily see this as an argument of reason. It's not about a sustainable future and who couldn't want that. But it becomes a much more holistic picture so that we can really bring on board everyone.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It's not about reason anymore, or even logic. It's about interest and power. And you're right at the heart of it. I mean, texting you from COP when you were in COP was an amazing experience, and we'll get into that too. But just to be, I know you've been we were joking about kind of sometimes like the necessity of like the all-nighters and like sleeping on the floor or the couch or whatever. And it's like these very powerful, or these maybe seen as maybe more exclusive spaces. Although I think, to your point, like we want more people in those, and it's good to hear that like from the inside you also want more folks in there. But how so often it kind of comes down to just like words on a page or specific, literally one word. I know there was sort of a famous instance of that. Maybe there was this year too, but like years ago, or a year ago. So, okay. Before we get into all this, I keep like hinting at where I want to go, of course, but I really do want to ask you about growing up in Maine, because that is something that we both share. And then of course, attending the high school that we did. But I think it sounds like, I'm curious to hear more about your, like, how you got interested in this. I know there was maybe a pivot at one point from like an interest area into this world. Mm-hmm. Tell me about growing up in Maine and how you got into this space.
So I was born in Maine, and I grew up along the coast. And I think for me, one moment that really sticks out was when I was in kindergarten, and we were studying a unit in kindergarten on astronomy, or the nighttime sky. And obviously, being in kindergarten, I knew what I was learning, and therefore I was, becoming an expert in this area, right? And honestly,
with you, I wouldn't doubt that. But yes.
Well, we'll see. And so I had one evening where I was spending the night with my uncle at my grandmother's house, and he and I we were going to sleep outside in a tent. And we were looking at the stars first, and he saw a shooting star. And I was really, really upset that he saw the shooting star, because here I was in kindergarten studying the night sky.
You're an expert. Why didn't you see the star? Hello.
And here's my uncle, who's, never mind being a science teacher, but he got to see the shooting star. And I just thought it was really, really unfair. So I let him know that. And he told me that I could see my own shooting star if I wanted to, but I would need to stay up and persevere. Mainly, I was really upset that once he saw the shooting star, he couldn't show me where it was, and I was supposed to trust him that it was there.
So you didn't see this when he said, like he saw it and you didn't see it. Okay.
So I didn't even believe that he had seen it, because he couldn't prove it to me. Yeah. So he went to bed in the tent. I stayed out, with my head sticking out of the tent. And finally, after what felt like ages, again, being 5 or whatever it was.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're about 5 at this age. Yeah, okay.
So I saw a shooting star. And of course, I had to wake him up and tell him that I saw a shooting star. And I had to tell my grandmother in the morning when we went inside and had breakfast that I'd seen a shooting star, and I put my fingers out in front of me because I had measured it, with my fingers, with my arm extended. Yeah. And I brought that measurement back to my face and was like, ooh, it was like a whole inch long. And so I was so excited that I saw my shooting star that was an entire inch long. My other uncle was there, and he's also a scientist. And together they were telling me that maybe I should study astronomy, so I decided at that moment that I was going to study astronomy and I was going to be an astrophysicist. And my grandmother, who grew up during the Cold War and was not super keen on that idea. I think she didn't really think that maybe her granddaughter should be an astrophysicist. But the only thing she knew about that field was space race and US and Russia conflicts. So she told me that I shouldn't do it. And of course I asked her for, give me a good reason. I'm 5. I can do what I want. And she said, well, I'd have to learn Russian. So I said, fine. Well, then I'm going to be a Russian speaking astrophysicist. And so I actually stuck with that through school, partway into my undergrad, and stopped it in undergrad only because I actually got quite sick and had to drop out for a little while and was out of sync when I rejoined. But yeah, so that was really my action in the science. I did have a moment where I really pivoted. I don't know if really pivoted, but sort of changed what I was looking at in the astrophysics side. I started undergrad in Portland, Maine, alongside high school when I was about 14. And I was taking...
Okay, so you were in high school and you're doing college degree work or college level work as well. Yeah. Okay. At USM. Where were you?
At USM, University of Maine.
Why does this not surprise me? Incredible.
And
okay, continue.
So I was taking classes before in the morning and then night classes there. And I took one class, and there was so much enthusiasm in that class about extraterrestrial life. And part of that where it started to bother me was, let's look for planets that could be inhabitable when Earth is no longer habitable.
Oh yeah.
And it was this framing
in that early, like they were saying that in the year. Interesting. Cause I feel like that's so common to talk about now, but
no. It's been a thread for quite a while.
Wow. Okay.
So it wasn't sort of, hey, let's look for places that could support life as we know it. Let's look for, just different, water on different planets, whatever, or different bacteria. It was phrased, and what people were really getting on is where we can go when Earth isn't habitable, as in these two things are givens. And that really struck me.
Jeez.
And, one of the things I was looking at in the astronomy world at that time was basically ice on other planets. And that got me really fascinated with ice, and then ice on the Earth. So that was one of those early links that for me, alongside growing up next to Bowdoin College and going to their Arctic Museum and things like that, really linked me from a scientific side into the importance of the colder regions and glaciers and ice, which is now what I do.
Amazing. Oh my gosh. Okay. That's really interesting that was not only that was in conversation, but that you were interested in ice on other planets and then kind of came back around to being like, well, wait, what about this planet? Like, let's talk about this planet first, which I so appreciate as someone that reads those headlines, or, it's in the kind of common discourse right now of like, let's go find other places to live, 'cause this is, like this might be gone. And you're like, well, wait a minute. Why are we giving up? Why is that even in conversation?
But it wasn't even this might be gone. It's this will be.
Yeah. It's like this will be. Did they say it? Were they attributing that to climate change, or were they just kind of like,
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It was specifically that's the conversation. Wow. That's so interesting. Okay. Interesting. Okay. So as we like travel through your academic and growing up in Maine journey, I also want to like parallel path this with your athletic life.
Yep.
So you rode growing up. Like when did skiing come in? When did rowing come in?
Yeah.
Also now to like flash forward, are you still coaching at Waynfleet rowing?
I am still coaching.
Okay. So you coach at our high school for the rowing program that you did,
which
or you were our participant in. You started. Okay, wait, This is actually, I was going to ask, this is my next question, because it started right around, I think we might have not overlapped in high school, meaning I was in middle school when you were in high school, maybe. But I remember the team starting from scratch.
Yeah.
And maybe the ski team too. So anyways, tell everyone about this.
So they have a Nordic team. I actually did alpine racing.
Yeah. Okay.
I did that for a long time, and then did it independently throughout high school.
Got it. Independent. I remember those. I can't remember what it was called, but it was like independent sport or something. Because I did that for ice hockey because Waynfleet didn't have a team. So
exactly. So my alpine ski racing was independent from Waynfleet. I briefly joined the Nordic team because I wanted to actually improve my alpine skiing, and never really did much with them, because doing a Nordic team while doing my skiing most days and training for that was a little overboard.
Not to mention you're like taking college classes. I don't even know how you did any of this. So okay, great.
so I stuck with my alpine skiing. And then basically a teacher I had, who was a math teacher at the time, happened to have 2 rowing shells, a 4-person and an 8-person boat, in his backyard. And he happened to live near the water, had water access from his property. And a couple of us had spoken about, wouldn't it be nice if we had a crew program? And he agreed to take us on and put us out there and see what would happen. But on my background in rowing, I actually had rowed before. It's a big sport for my father's family. And I had a couple cousins who'd competed internationally at the World Championships and the Olympics. And I had a couple isolated memories of the sport when I was little, because these were actually my father's cousins who were younger than he was, but a decade or 2 older than I was. And they would get on the rowing machines in the morning, and I'd go off and do something, and I'd come back and they're still on the rowing machines. And I'd sort of make this mental note of how I don't want to do anything with the sport, because you're sitting there going back and forth clearly all day long. And of course, knowing that, they did a morning session and then an afternoon session, whatever. But in my, 5-year-old brain, it's like, you literally sat there. Yeah. How horrible can that be?
Right.
But, I also, they also brought chocolate back from one of the world championships and shared that. And it's like, oh, so you row. So
you get to go to cool places.
And you get cool chocolate.
And eat chocolate.
So, my little, again, my 5-year-old brain putting this all together.
Yeah.
This sport could have its perks.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did get
five was like a big year for you.
Was.
I feel.
Yeah. I actually was really devastated.
There's a lot that happened.
I was having nightmares before I turned 6. And maybe I'm able to piece that together.
Maybe this is why. Wow. We're making some discoveries here.
I know.
Okay.
I like it.
Yes. Continue.
So I first got in a sculling shell. So that's 2 oars when I was 10 and 11, and did it a little bit, enjoyed it, and messed around a little, very, very casually. I did have a rowing machine that my father acquired a couple years after that I messed around on. And so when we found out that this teacher in school had some boats, it was sort of, okay, I've done the sport. I like it. And, hey, if I get good, I can go to cool places and eat chocolate. So that.
And it all connected.
So we got the Wayne Fleet program off and running, and it's obviously developed as any program would over, 15, 20 years in a multitude of ways. And so I actually moved back to Maine a couple of years ago, and somebody connected me back with that program and said that they need some help. And I was actually very burnt out from the sport, and I wanted nothing to do with it. I did go and compete internationally, and I was a full-time athlete.
Did you get chocolate?
Yes and no. I did get my chocolate, but I also competed as a lightweight where I had to save my chocolate.
Oh,
but it didn't mean that
interesting.
I would invest in better chocolate, and I would really savor it.
Yeah. That's good.
So, I think it worked out.
Yeah, definitely. But you're a full-time athlete during that time.
For a while. I was a full-time athlete. I did an Olympic campaign. I came back and I was just exhausted from it. And wanted nothing to do with the sport. I was moving here, not really sure what I was going to be doing. And I came back. Somebody connected me with the sport and said, hey, we really need your help. Can you go in and help? And I was like, that's not what I committed to. I don't want to. There was a program around that would need some coxing over the summer. So somebody to, sort of control the boat and give a little bit of boat coaching. And I had said that maybe I could do that because I had some experience as a cox, but not too much. It would still be different. It wouldn't be, me dwelling on eating issues and how much I hate the sport and the pressures of how I had been feeling about it. It would be a different exploration.
Yeah.
And so I said, maybe I'll do that. And I'm like, well, okay, that's great. But can you come for the winter and just help me with the coaching? And then you can do the summer stuff. And so I said I'd try it a little bit. I'd sort of dip my toe in and see. I'd show up a couple times. And it turned out that I really loved it. And, I think I loved it for a lot of reasons, but we really focused on a love for the sport and how can you do something for the joy of doing it? And how do you develop yourself? And so, our focus now is very much, doing the best we can, going and competing is fun, but it's really a lot more fun if you do well. And so, that's an emphasis. And we have some kids who certainly want to go to Division I schools and have scholarships and things.
Right.
But we also have some kids that just need some structure in their lives. They're there because their friends are there or they've never been, they've self-declared themselves never good at sports. And, we're offering them a sport that doesn't have a ball. So they're willing to try it.
Right.
And you have some kids who just absolutely flourish and do very well. But it's, for me, the whole MO is really about having fun and learning something new and being able to push those boundaries and pushing yourself past your comfort zone. And I think one thing that was really most rewarding for me in my first season was a teacher reaching out and just saying, I don't know what you've done with this kid, but the only thing that's changed is this kid has spent 2 months or 3 months with you every afternoon, and suddenly they're getting their homework in on time and they're showing up prepared. And it's just, for us, it's things like we emphasize teamwork. We emphasize doing your role, and that, nobody's going to expect you to be better than you can be, but you're expected to be as best you can, whatever that looks like for you on whatever day. And, the whole goal with the program is that it's really instill that ethos in ourselves, that we show up as fully as we can, knowing that certain days you're going to have other things going on or whatnot, but show up as much as you can for everything you're doing. Yeah. And hopefully find fun in it. So, and that was something that I don't want to say I never had in rowing. I did. But when it was at a high enough level of competition, that got lost. Yeah. So totally. And, dealing with injuries and things like that skew it. Of course. As well. Of course. Yeah. So I've stayed coaching. Yeah. I'm a little bit of a problem as a coach. I have a few trips each year. So this year I started the season. I missed the first couple of weeks because I was off on skiing across Greenland. I came back and I then had to go to New York the UN General Assembly, came back. Then I had to go to Brussels for stuff. Again, I'll show up and I'll give 100% when I'm there. And that's what we ask with the kids too. And we have a fabulous network of volunteers around who are eager to jump in for a day or two, or even a couple of weeks. Yeah. So that we can really get some consistency when I'm not there. Yeah. Well, I love that. Thank you for sharing too, actually, kind of those individual stories, because that really, really feels like it hits home. And I think to me, that's what it's like. Those kinds of stories are what matter. The the kids' lives that are changed, or the difference in social behavior or homework, completion, that kind of thing is so incredible. And I'm laughing because I read, in the wonderful Portland Press Herald, that is our newspaper in Maine, one of them, but a wonderful newspaper that did an article on you where I think the opening line was one of your rowers, one of your students saying, "Oh, we always thought Susana was in the CIA," and that's sort of the intro quote. And that then transitions into the kids being like, yeah, she's always flying to Sweden and speaks 4 languages fluently and 6 others conversing. It's so true. I'm sure as a student, having you in their lives, I'm sure they're like, what does she do? Who is she? Who is this? So this transitions into, obviously, you went on, as you're competing internationally, you also went on to get multiple degrees. You went to Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar. I'm interested in both your journey into climate science, which you sort of got into a little bit, and cryoscience. Is that cryosphere the term? Cryosphere science. There you go. Cryosphere science. I was like, I know I'm going to say this wrong. But you also use, because you just alluded to this, you skied across Greenland. So you use, which is so cool, specifically for this podcast, because it's exactly at the intersection of what we're talking about here, of you use your athleticism, your love for sport, your passion for sport, and your ability to complete these expeditions as climate advocacy. So I'm curious, both maybe taking the kind of, the love of science and into your later degrees, but also combine, how did you start to figure out that you could combine skiing and your rowing physicality with climate advocacy? It's a big question, but walk us through, continue the story. How did these all come to be? It is a big question. And I don't necessarily know that I have an answer for how that came to be. Fair enough. I think my first personal realization of something that I can do, not just what I see other people doing, was at a rowing regatta in which I was racing in South Africa. And a couple things struck me. One was the temperature. It was about 100, just over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And one colleague there, or one competitor there, made some comment about how, in a joking way, their their race strategy was waiting until I keel over from the heat, which they expect will happen about halfway through the race. And, we were joking about this, but, it led into conversations with me and then with some other national teams about the safety of racing in the heat, and that we're having, national team trials, high level events. I mean, I did my Olympic campaign for the Rio Olympics when I was getting emails daily from the US Olympic Committee about the Zika outbreak and, what we're going to be doing for this. And, these impacts that climate have on high level sport and on all levels of sport too. But when you add in the high level, you get governance issues. You've got you add in more dimensions, I think, at least for me. So there was that, but also at this one regatta in South Africa, we also used it as a way to bring community members to see sport on the water, but to see water as something to be valued for all of its resources. We were doing this race on a reservoir and was talking about the importance of water, hygiene, sanitation, the animals that were living in the water. I've never had a pre-race briefing that has spoken about what we have to do on, if a hippo gets there, or if a crocodile starts chasing us, what is the protocol? And does an elephant have right of way if something else gets in the water? So I think those two things were sort of, thinking about in my own rowing, how can I use this? And, that regatta that decided it was going to focus on water security, it didn't affect how the regatta was going. It didn't affect anything about the event. We still raced. We still did that. It was just sort of on the side of that. So realizing that I can do things, but on the side, I can have a climate message and that can add to, but it doesn't take away from what else I'm doing.
Yeah. Interesting.
And then of course, realizing the safe parameters for sport.
Right. Right. And I mean, that's something we talk about, even the heat piece you just mentioned, we talk about that in trail running all the time. Exactly. I mean, it's getting like, there are races that are 100-mile races that happen in 100-degree weather consistently now, like Western states is an example of, it's in California. And there was a climate scientist that made a heat map, basically like showcasing sort of the changing levels of heat over the years and the impact on an athlete's body. I mean, it's wild how close the connection is. It's not just like we talked about that earlier, kind of the thesis of this being, if you like spending time in nature, you want to protect what you love. Sure. But also like there's sort of that other sharper edge of, well, here's the impact on an athlete's body if you are competing at a high level, or if you're not competing at a high level. But like if you're running a 100-mile race, which in my opinion, anyone who's running that is a high level athlete. But like you're realizing the impacts of drought, of heat, of air quality as a runner. Yeah, all of these pieces really connect, of course.
And even if you're a backyard competitor, I mean, if you want to go out and ski, you need snow,
right?
And we're seeing changes in patterns of snow. I mean, for me, looking at, temperatures, it's not just sort of these extremes of the human body, although that's certainly a big part of it, but it's the anomalies from what we expect. I mean, when I was in Greenland skiing this autumn, we had days where we were waking up at 2 a.m. to start skiing because we couldn't ski past midday. The snow would get too soft. And it's like, it wasn't necessarily above 0 degrees or above freezing, but the sun on the snow warmed it up enough that we could still ski. It was just slower and it was slush. It sort of stuck to our skis and it just wasn't as much fun. Mm-hmm. So, we had to frame our day around that. And that meant packing up and heading out at 2 a.m. Right.
And that's still available at 2 a.m. But like, what happens if there's no time of the day when it, we
had that as well at times where, we're there in the autumn and it should be well frozen. And we had rain. High levels. We had rivers that, big ice canyons of rivers that shouldn't be there. We should be able to use frozen pathways, of a sort of a frozen river to make some good headway. And suddenly there's this rushing river 100 feet wide and we can't cross it. And there's only one way to go, to get past it. And that's to go around it. But that can take, that's miles and miles out of one's way.
Definitely. Yeah.
So it's, coming across what isn't seen.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And you're, as an athlete or as someone who's, you're on skis, you're in nature, you're literally seeing the impacts or feeling the impacts on your skis or whatever you want to call it. Like that's the sort of the up close and personal element of these outdoor recreation pursuits, I feel like. And so these might be different purposes for these trips, but now you've mentioned the Greenland trip. I also read that was it in Svalbard that you did this, you sort of recreated this expedition on skis?
To see how we could get, but how far.
Okay.
Yes.
So so tell me more about these ski expeditions that you embark on and how, if they do, which I think they do, overlap with climate science, with your advocacy around this topic. Like it's so cool that you do this. And I just want to ask you more about it because it's very unique. It's really, really unique.
Yeah, no. So the one that you mentioned that started in Svalbard, this was sort of a post-COVID project, but started off during COVID with somebody reading a book about an expedition, a failed expedition to the North Pole from about, at that point, probably 148 years earlier. And while reading that, he realized that in 2 years, it would be 150 years, we could do a little trip and see how much of this expedition we could recreate. So basically what happened is that they went to this one spot in Svalbard and then tried to ski north to get to the North Pole. And eventually they couldn't, well, first of all, in the spot where they started off, they actually they took a ship as far as they could. And that ship got frozen in, and it was frozen in for 2 years. We went there, and that was sort of our ceremonial start. Now, their ship was frozen in for 2 years. I was taking water samples, like reaching down and getting liquid water in from this one area. Wow. It's right off Svalbard. So I could stand on the ice, but on the snow of Svalbard and reach into the ocean. And this is where they were frozen in for 2 winters. And it's like, I know it's 150 years ago, but that's like 2 years they couldn't move. That's a lot of ice loss. And we were there at a point where there should still be ice in the season. We were very early in the season, end of April. And this is 80 degrees north or so, 79 degrees north at that point. So this expedition was led by a Swedish person named Adolf Nordenskiöld. That expedition basically sought to go to the North Pole. They eventually ran into too much sea ice. So sea ice isn't very smooth. It's not very nice. It can really pile up, and it requires a lot of sort of physical climbing over it. And they eventually gave up, said that they couldn't get through it. So, but because they had sought to be the first to the North Pole, and they knew that their journey would be scrutinized, they took a lot of journal entries, measurements, what they could, photographs of where they were. And we have all of that information today in Swedish archives. So we were able to get all of this information and figure out exactly where they had gone, and then retrace that expedition and say, like, what is it like 150 years difference? So that's what we did. And we set off from, again, ski to this spot where it's called Polheim in Mosebukta and Svalbard, where this expedition had been frozen in, and then set off north. That's where I was taking my liquid water samples, where not only was the water liquid, but I was also getting plastic in it. And there were very few, if any, I mean, there's nobody who lives near there. So this is plastic that is, getting into the water system, getting into the ocean.
Are you live assessing these samples, or are you?
Some of them, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
But I could pull out nylon. So, I mean, it was, this wasn't, sort of the
makes
nanoplastics.
Me so,
God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. These are not nanoplastics. Exactly. You're able to.
I mean, there's the nanoplastics as well. But these were it's sort of all range in sizes. But the amount of stuff, because the ocean currents go right up into the Arctic, and then it's sort of this body of water that's held between different land masses. Yeah. So it's kind of stuck there.
Yeah. I guess that makes sense. Yeah.
And so we set north, and we skied as far as we could. And eventually we also couldn't complete, but we failed because there was not enough ice rather than too much ice.
Too much.
So
interesting.
Yeah. So we also failed, as expected. I mean, we knew it was a mission to failure. I mean, we have satellites and we have things like that.
It's still like the advocacy and the message you were able to send, whether that was the intention or not, of being like, we failed because there's not enough ice or there's not enough snow, like where we ran into water. like that's sort of the opposite of what happened 150 years ago.
Yeah.
But that in and of itself is an advocacy message.
Exactly. And, being out there with my camera and being able to take video of myself skiing on increasingly thin ice. And you can watch as I am clearly sinking into the Arctic Ocean as it's, less stable, and you're seeing little bits of seaweed or nylon rope, various things that are, around my skis. And showing that here's what I've just pulled out of this part of the ocean, because we have this idea that these places are so pristine, and they really aren't. Mm-hmm. Never mind the fact that we've used so much of the Arctic as a nuclear test zone, and a lot of it is radioactive, and we've, people live there, and in many cases in highly polluted areas that are not of their own doing. But, another big one for me too, especially living right next to Brunswick, Maine, where there was a spill fire suppressant foam that got into discussions on the PFAS and the forever chemicals, and also elsewhere in Maine on farms that had sludge put down that had these chemicals in them. And so that's become an increasing topic around here, as it is, I think, increasing around the world, around the country anyway. But, I've been talking about being in the Arctic and having the water that I'm boiling, and I'm collecting this from snow or the ice. 1,000 miles from any serious community or community of any size. And it's got PFAS in it. This stuff gets into our atmosphere and it falls as snow here. So this idea that I can be as remote as I can be in the middle of Antarctica, and I am still affected by the rubbish that we as humans are putting into the environment. And for me, that's personally a really powerful experience, but to be able to share that with other people as well. These places aren't just about beautiful scenery. They're not just about, avoiding frostbite, but they're beautiful. And in some ways they're, pure, whatever we want to call it, but they're really impacted by us. And it's like, if we can, if we have that kind of impact on really remote places, we know what the impact is we have elsewhere. Yeah. So.
Right. But that's arguably the most extreme part of the world, even, the farthest away point, and you're seeing this impact there. Of course, it's going to be present elsewhere if people hadn't already realized that.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. And how it's there. I mean, we have PFAS. I mean, it can get there in the atmosphere within a week or so from major cities closer to the equator. So it's pretty impressive. And just, I think for me, the big point on any expedition is, there's my personal side, but it's really about communication and sharing it. Yeah. And I take a lot of photographs. I have huge journals that I've put together, which I don't know what I'm going to do with yet, but
interesting.
Really, so
you've documented really well what you've seen, and you've been able to hopefully share more with people. But definitely through like Instagram and other channels. And actually, something that I was curious about asking before we kind of come to present day and then close was something that you talked about in your TED Talk, obviously very like central to your talk, was language. And you mentioned that you learned Russian. I sort of dropped the 6 language hint, but you do speak so many languages, and it's very impressive. And what's cool about that, I think, is the ability then for not only you to communicate in these far-flung places that you traveled to on these expeditions, but also talking about the use of climate change or climate crisis or the word hope. Can you talk a little bit, to condense the TED Talk into a few minutes or whatever you want to share here, but can you talk a little bit about language in this conversation? Because you just mentioned communication. So to me, that's sort of like the next step is when you say that, what does that mean to you, and how important is language in this conversation?
No, thank you for that question. Language is one of my passion. And I don't want to quite say I know this passion. I actually do have a secret master's degree in linguistics. And
there you go.
But it's my pet passion. And what I love about language is that we can use it to get things done, and we can use it to shape worldviews. So, in the TED Talk, I was talking about things. You mentioned climate change versus climate crisis. And, the simple idea there is that change is indifferent. It can be good, it can be bad, it can go in a bunch of different ways.
It's neutral.
It's neutral. It doesn't tell us anything. Crisis, on the other hand, tells us what to think about it. And it provides us with sort of this tipping point, for lack of a better term, of what do we do now? This inflection point. How do we react to this? Because it demands a reaction.
Yeah.
And we're actually seeing this in my work in the climate negotiations. I've now done 7 rounds of climate negotiations within the UN sphere. We're seeing a real pushback on science and negation of science. And what we're seeing are people who will say, temperature's rising, or something with increasing certainty that climate is going to go in some direction. And what we see is that these same things get into that final text, but instead of say, with temperatures rising, it will say, noted with concern, temperatures rising. It will say, noted changes in temperature.
Yeah.
So you could, if you wanted to, argue that technically says the same thing, but it does without any of the actual meaning to it.
Right.
So changes in temperature. Well, first of all, instead of noting with concern, I'm just noting it. So I've taken out not just the emotion, but the validity of the fact that I'm noting it. So, but then to say, well, changes in temperature, well, yeah, they could be going down because I don't say that. Right. So we don't know if that's good or bad, or maybe it fluctuates. And then you can see, well, the temperature's always changed, or carbon levels in the atmosphere, they've always, there's always an up and down. So how do we frame things to really get work done, and also be aware of framing? So to know what is the motivation behind anything that we say. And when we get into, you mentioned earlier that negotiation where it was literally over a very small one word. And these negotiations often are those of us sitting around a table with what looks like a Google Docs, projected on a screen, and we were going through it word by word and arguing over these little minutiae.
And when you say we, how many people are we talking in like a room, say?
So it depends. Usually, I'd say on average, it's probably about 40 countries.
Yeah. This is for the IPCC, by the way.
Well, it's the same, very similar process, IPCC or the climate COP negotiations.
COP. Yeah.
And COP, there's another one that happens in the spring that's sort of a parallel to COP, or sister conference to COP every year. Smaller, that's just on negotiations. But yes, you have different countries that come together. There's about 15 different tracks that are in negotiations. Science, there's science track, there's mitigation, a couple adaptation, loss and damage, series of finance, nationally determined contributions, adaptation plans, etc. Countries can send somebody, and then that person joins that space, and then they can speak on behalf of their country. So, but the goal is to come out with at the end of the process and at the event is over the series of couple weeks is to come out with a text. That is sort of where we go forward. But you'll see as countries will pull apart things such as, mention the IPCC as best available science. And somebody will say, ooh, well, do we know that that's the best available science? Maybe it's not. We should, remove mentions to the IPCC. We should remove mentions instead of saying we welcome their contributions to just, it has made inputs. So, we have one topic that has come up both in the meetings in June in Germany, and then also this past COP as well, is, this idea of 1.5 degrees. Can we still say that's the lower limit of the Paris Agreement? Right. Because certain countries, with last year when we breached it, we didn't technically breach the Paris Agreement because that's looking at a long-term temperature goal, but we did breach it for a year. So there's some countries that are saying, well, if we've breached it for a year, we can't rule out the fact that we'd breach it. It's effectively worked in, and we're going to breach it. So let's just get rid of it completely. So, what is the role of language? What does inclusion? What does exclusion mean? Who is in the room? What are the motives? How does language affect process? How can we get things done? So I find that all very fascinating.
Absolutely. Same. And I think in both communication of topics and also in these negotiations, which sound like they could be extremely frustrating, but maybe that's just me as a citizen watching in. Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. What country, when you are representing in these communities, in these groups, like what are you representing the US? Is it all country based, or is it like you're there for Arctic science, or?
Yeah, no, that's a good question.
I'm curious how that works.
Countries have the right to speak, and observers and constituencies, so non-country groups, can, depending on circumstance, have the right to speak. I work for a group that hosts a secretariat called the Ambition on Melting Ice, high-level group for for sea level rise in water resources. Clearly need to practice saying that.
Really, I was going to say a real simple title.
Yes, we refer to it as AMI, just Ambition on Melting Ice. And we have 25 countries right now that we are sort of have contracts with or agreements with. And another handful that we work with, either they're joining us or we have some ad hoc relationship with them, and work with them on scheming negotiations, figuring out what strategy is, how do the negotiations fit together. You know, again, mentioned at the beginning that glaciers are something that impact 85% of the countries of the world. A lot of people in a lot of countries don't know that. And, you know, and we're bringing in these. So yes, I'm there as a polar cryospheric person, but we're working on things from the glacier perspective, such as, you know, agricultural communities and civil security. So it's very broad. It's not just ice is melting and you know, we're going to lose the ice. So it's everything, you know, and the countries we work with as part of this group, you know, we have some Palau and Samoa, Vanuatu, for example, and Cuba and Barbuda. Like, they're not glaciated countries, but they're impacted by the loss of ice sheets, for example.
Definitely. Sea level rise.
And sea level rise. So we are there to really to elevate this into those discussions, but also to work with these countries about, you know, providing talking points or helping them sort of figure out, because you've got so many negotiators that are doing so many different things. Yeah. We're sort of a little bit of the brains behind a lot of what goes on in the negotiations.
Yeah. Interesting. Super informative. And I also feel like, I mean, I had like a million questions to ask you about COP, but I know we've seen a lot of the sort of like, we were texting about, you know, the air conditioning is this, or the, like, there was flooding in part of the building. And then of course there was, I'm so glad everyone's okay, but there was like the fire that broke out. I mean, it really seemed like it was sort of a COP of the elements, if you will, probably like pun intended or not. Like, it was just wild to watch that from afar. But did you feel, I mean, this is like, I'll ask you then the last question and then we can wrap on this. But did you feel, I don't know, like, was there something that stood out to you either as like really frustrating or really hopeful, or something in between from this last experience? So for those that don't know, the COP that just happened was in Brazil. So you went down, and it was also like, I feel like the housing was a whole thing, and they like cleared a bunch of space for this COP to happen. I mean, I'll link to all this for folks who want to research like more about this COP, but I was just curious, like, what your experience was sort of at a high level, or like what takeaways you had, maybe.
It was a very strange COP for me, very weird COP. And I mentioned that to a few other people, and like, yeah, that's kind of the word for it. You know, it was definitely a COP of the elements that, you know, if we can't hear each other talk about the climate crisis, then the climate crisis is going to come to us. So we, you know, and the ironies there of one of the pavilions that actually flooded was the Pacific Islands pavilion that had to close.
Oh gosh.
Flooding. It's, you know,
I didn't know that.
So, you know, the ironies there, it was other pavilions as well, but they actually had to close, whereas others just got a little bit wet.
God, there's too much irony. It's like too real. Yeah. Yeah.
And the air conditioning that in the negotiation rooms meant at times people were, you know, bringing in blankets and hiding under the blankets. But then at other areas, it hit 50 degrees centigrade in the building, apparently. At least that's what they officially reported. But the air conditioning would be so strong that you couldn't necessarily hear it. We couldn't hear each other. And we're using microphones.
Wow.
And there were times where thunderstorms would come in and it would knock out the power, and then we couldn't talk. We couldn't hear each other. We'd have to have recesses if the storm got really... Even just with rain, and it would rain a couple times every day.
Wow.
So it was one that, you know, we were inside, but it didn't necessarily feel like that. You know, it was strange right from the beginning. I had a lockdown and then a evacuation the second official day of COP, when they said that this was going to be an Indigenous COP. And then, we had Indigenous communities like, great. Why are we not part of it?
Yeah.
And, it kind of gets back to your point on access, is that these are still very exclusive areas. People in there want more voices, but they're expensive to go. The housing, as you mentioned, is always a struggle. Transportation can be hard and expensive. I mean, if you're going to host a COP, in the Amazon, in a place that doesn't have the infrastructure for this.
Right.
And you've got to be accredited by the UN to be in an area where people are going to hear you. You can go and you can be in the countryside called the green zone, but nobody who's in negotiations actually, or who has any power, really spends any time there. So it's, it is, access still is an issue. But one thing that struck me, I guess, at this COP, and again, having done numerous negotiations with the UN on climate before in several fora, was that there's been a rising development for the past few years that the whole COP system isn't working. And if we talk about it more, maybe we can change something. And this undertone of, if we talk about it more, maybe we can change something, it's really started to bubble up last year, sort of to where people really were talking about it. So I was kind of watching that a little bit this year. And really what I think I've come away with, and what other people have come away with from it, is that the system is the system. And it may not change, and we may not be able to change it directly, but we don't need to be limited to that system. And that's really what I think came out of this COP, is that, we can say that here's countries who actually want to do something, and we can band together and we can do something. And we can do things that actually impact those countries that don't necessarily want to take action on fossil fuels.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So we can pull them along as well, but we don't need to wait for this institution to do that for us.
Yeah. As evidenced by the US showing up in many ways after pulling out of the, it's like the interesting difference between our government right now in the US and then I listened to like Gavin Newsom's speech and, folks that were there that were like, this is not representative of what we feel like. We want to take action. And I'm sure this is a whole can of worms, but it was interesting to see our country show up despite having leadership that feels like it's giving the finger to climate action right now.
I had been told at a pre-COP meeting by several governments that the US would be showing up. The US is certainly invited because we are still, until January 20th, a member of the Paris Agreement.
Right. True.
And we did not show up in June at the June UN meetings. There was, at, the plenary, everybody's there with their country placard, and the US is there with 2 blank seats behind it.
Wow.
This year, the US had its placard out, but there was, again, nobody there. We were prepared for the US to be there, and had been told that it might be a late decision. But there was a meeting in October, an extraordinary meeting of the International Maritime Organization, the IMO, that was looking at shipping emissions and creating a net zero framework for shipping going forward. And this had been a discussion that they had at a meeting in London in April, and it had been pretty much in the bag that this framework would be adopted successfully. And the US got involved, along with a few others, but the US really led that charge, threatening other countries, threatening diplomatic relations, threatening with sanctions and tariffs. And eventually it meant that this actually failed in October. So we agreed to delay getting this IMO net zero plan for a year, but the majority of countries couldn't support it based on the US's actions. Yeah. So that was still weighing in a little bit at COP, that even though the US wasn't there, they weren't not there.
Right.
And, seeing countries and their relations, and the US was definitely mentioned a fair bit. And yeah, Gavin Newsom was there. There were a handful of other governors and mayors, as there usually are. There was supposed to be an unofficial delegation from Congress that was going to be about 20 people strong. Unfortunately, only Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island made it in the end. Yeah. He was only there for a couple of days, but I did have a great conversation with him about living on the coast of Maine and coast of New England.
Perfect.
He's big into sea level rise, and I want to do some stuff with him. So I spoke with him about that. And it was exciting.
Good. Yeah.
Unfortunately, with the government shutdown and the cutting of SNAP benefits, and all of that everybody else had to stay.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of key Senate votes for a while as well. So that was unfortunate. But they were prepared to fully self-fund themselves. They had that all sorted so that if the U.S. wouldn't let them go.
Wow. Yeah.
They didn't support. Usually there's an unofficial delegation of Congress, but they are supported by the State Department. So they're like, you know what, this is important that the U.S. be there. And if our State Department won't send us, then, we don't need them.
Right. Yeah. Wow. Very interesting. Well, I think what you said about COP, the format, or even the, kind of the way that it's run for so many years, maybe not working anymore, maybe not being the only way. I'll be very interested to kind of watch for that, because I heard that from a couple other folks that were there, that there might, there's like, is this working? Is this the way we want to be doing these negotiations and having these conversations? Or are there ways to invite more voices in, have more people join? Or like, where are these conversations happening? It's really interesting to think about, because I think it's been that way for so long.
It's embedded in the COP process.
Yeah.
And the whole COP requires consensus on any substantive decision. And that was that was Saudi Arabia and some other OPEC, the oil exporting countries, that forced that in there back at the beginning of the UN framework on climate. So that's something that's baked into the system. So that's what we're working against.
Right.
No other, or almost no other, UN or global decision makers making systems require consensus.
Right. Interesting.
So
yeah.
So,
and it's been embedded.
There's a conference that was announced at the UN General Assembly, but re-announced at COP with Colombia and the Netherlands, held in Santa Marta, Colombia in April. That's going to be directly on fossil fuel phase out.
Interesting.
Has support of about 90 countries at COP came out in support of that. So that's one area where some countries are gathering together to say, here, we're going to go outside of COP and just see what we can.
Interesting.
So something to watch.
Well, that will
hopefully
that will be interesting to watch for sure. Yeah, that was my next question. Okay, I have taken up so much of your time. I do have one more question to ask you to wrap this, so we can make it quick. By the way, thank you so much for all of your time and for all of these stories. Like, I feel like I could just keep sitting here and listening to you and asking you more about your expeditions and asking you about coaching and everything. So it's like I'm restraining myself. The last question that I ask everybody on this podcast is sort of like have more of a future looking or positive, like maybe uplifting end to these conversations, is what is your or one of your favorite climate solutions that is not, and I add this piece of that is not your own, because we've literally just talked on these podcasts, not just here, we've talked for an hour about like someone's work that they do and like the climate solution they're working on. So in this case, like, you do so many things, so you can take this as you will, but what is a climate solution that is either your favorite or you are really excited about at the moment, and why? That's
such a good question. And I think it's really hard for me to answer because there are literally so many solutions. And
yes, of course.
I love
that's why I started asking a favorite.
Yeah, no, exactly. I love the fact that there are so many. I really love when people find something that they're passionate about and are able to weave a climate message into that. And often for me, that's something that isn't necessarily in your face climate. And therefore it can appeal to people who don't necessarily want to hear another talk on climate, for example. But by seeing this or experiencing what this person has to offer, they can take a new understanding of climate and maybe get a sense of urgency. So examples where I've seen that have been really impactful for me are a lot through art and poetry and music. And I played cello for a number of years and I need to get back into it. And I've done some out in the woods cello playing, and I love it. So I don't know if it's that really draws me to that sort of nexus of art and nature. But to me, that's really powerful.
Very cool. Yeah, I've seen both, or like heard of both, music that incorporates climate lyrics and action in that way. And then I've also seen like Yo-Yo Ma playing on a glacier, like with, Patagonia, the climate activist. Like,
so we actually brought him to Switzerland to play on a glacier.
Oh, you did? Okay, I was wondering. I was like, you must have seen this. That's so cool.
Bring a cello for him because he couldn't play.
He played your cello?
Well, he didn't play mine. He was concerned about the wood in the cold.
Oh, understandably.
Yeah. So he decided he needed a carbon fiber cello. And
those exist?
They do exist.
I didn't even know
they're pretty
that.
Cool.
Wow.
And somebody found one in Spain, I believe, that they thought he could play. And he said, no, I don't want that one. I've played before. And so he tracked down somebody. He said, I have a friend in New York, and my friend has a carbon fiber cello. I'll play that one. Yo-Yo Ma is on tour in Florida, and I was going to Switzerland for this. And he's not coming back to back north to the cello. So I get the call, hey, you play cello. And I was invited to this event in Switzerland. Well, so like, can you detour and go to New York? Well, it turns out that this guy who owns this cello in New York lives part-time in Oxford. So I had that connection with him. Although I played a little bit in Oxford, but very informally. So I didn't play with him there. But yeah, so I had to go around and I had to run around New York. I had to get a new case for it. I had to get new strings, and I'm trying to figure out what strings would Yo-Yo Ma want. But I can't tell anybody that that's what I'm shopping for.
Right.
But trying to figure out what the temperature conditions are. Everybody has their own types of favorite strings, and is he going to have resin that works on these strings? Is he going to have, all of these things? So that was my secret mission for a week.
Okay. You have done some very cool secret missions, or missions in general. This might be the coolest one. This is up there. This is up there with a very cool mission.
I can say it was my best seatmate I've ever had on a plane, although it required to take the window seat legally, but
Wow. Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm sure you had to keep that with you the whole time. That's true. Well, okay. That is very cool. Can we like watch that performance, or is that available I can link to that if people want to find it. Okay, cool. I mean, honestly, the show notes for this are going to be lengthy because we have a lot of links to show people, and I'm really excited for that. Okay, Susana, thank you so much for joining. This was so fun. And again, very cool to have the high school reconnection, the Maine reconnection. And I'm really excited to keep tabs on your work and see what happens in the future, because you're obviously very central to all these conversations. And thank you for the work that you do as well.
Well, thank you very much.
You do a lot of really important work.
Connect with you, and sometime have to connect back in
Hopefully Maine. In Maine. Yeah, definitely.
Right. Thank you so much.